Our collaboration comes from sort of joint interest in my field and Thomas's field. So by education, I'm a musician, Thomas is an architect, and we're both very interested in both sound and space, and particularly in the intersection between those two domains.
The idea, the essential idea which underlies the symphony is the appropriation of the office space, the office environment, and the application of the musical idea of sampling to that architectural environment, to an entire space, and that is pursued through a musical metaphor of the orchestra. So we have taken the dot matrix printers and we've described them as instruments. They have players, which are their personal computers, and then those personal computers in turn have a chef d'orchestre, which is the network server. And we have written a score for these instruments, which is conducted by the network server and distributed to the PCs, and then played on the dot matrix printers themselves.
And additionally, because it is a performance and because the sound of the individual printers is relatively loud, but it's not loud enough to fill an entire theater-type space, we do two additional things. Onto this environment of obsolete technology, the dot matrix printers, we graft two other networks. One is a sound network, so basically an array of microphones that are very, very closely placed on particular parts of the mechanisms and focus in on those events, on those sound events. We also have a video network which works much the same way, which places miniature security cameras, very low quality cameras inside the actual mechanism of the printer, and the movements which create the sounds are blown up and visible on a large screen behind the performance.
This is the first piece that we actually created. This is now the Symphony No. 2 that we're going to be performing, but the concept is the same. And the process of the work that we went through over the course of development, which took about 4 or 5 years, was one of automation. So at the very beginning, there was no chef d'orchestre. We were triggering print jobs manually with very, very rudimentary tools. And gradually, we have distanced ourselves from the actual execution of the music. To the point where we now have a version of this piece called the Quartet for Dot Matrix Printer, which is a fully automated installation, where even the mix itself, the mix of the however many microphones there happen to be for the installation, is done is automated itself.
So we've written ourselves into obsolescence, written ourselves out of the piece,
which is very much about of interest to us in this analysis of work and the work environment and the office space, because we chose our name as a reflection on the person who has to use the pieces of technology which are manufactured and marketed to us as a society. And that person is deemed to be the user by engineers and architects. And it's a deep personification. And we can inflict all sorts of misery upon a user, which we would never inflict on, our friends or family, if we actually thought about it clearly. So it's an intellectual device which permits us to, as designers, to step away from the real experience of what it's like to be in a room full of dot matrix printers, which is absolutely horrible if you're trying to work or not make music, and puts it in an entirely different light.
And so by inhabiting the role of the user, by sort of appropriating that role and reclaiming it and going inside it, we have a vantage point on technology which is completely different from the ordinary utilitarian approach.
Our thinking has changed over the last decade, or at least mine has, about how we need to approach the making works. And I try to keep in mind the idea that processes can be remade. Ideas can be remade, but objects, if you link them to a specific technology, you're cooked. Basically, you get stuck in a time warp. So it's very difficult to adopt a specific obsolete technology, because then you guarantee that your artwork is not going to be around in a couple of decades.
It's the entire practice of recuperating the technology, bringing it into this other context, making a certain number of modifications and then displaying it for as long as that is feasible to do. Parts of that are performative. Parts of that refer to installation. But the work, the work is represented by the entire chain, I would say. Contrary to some artists who define themselves as media artists, I would say that our interest in technology is really not in the technology as such. We're not particularly interested, we're not techno-fetishists by any stretch of the imagination. What we really are interested in is the point of interface between a technology, be it a new technology or an older one, and the society in which it intervenes. And that, for us, is the key. If there isn't that link, if there isn't that point of interest, then it's not a project worth doing as far as we're concerned.